Is it smelling Brooks today?
You know all about that, eh?
I do.
It's not that bad, man. Honestly, you get used to it, dude.
So I've been told.
But yeah, it does get, especially during the summer, man, when the wind blows a certain way.
And it was even way better before the current plant that's there is bigger than the one that was there in the 70s. And the one that was there in the 70s was absolutely mind-blowing. You could smell it at Gleason.
Hold on, let's see. You know, the whole setup part of things has always been like a hassle. I'm getting a little bit better at it. Like, I remember when I was first doing my first couple of shows, I'd have like huge delays, man, like 15 minutes of me trying to get it working, and like it would be super annoying. But it's just basically I have to set up the streaming software, and then my audio has to be going, and then I have to put you on the right screen so that it's broadcasting the right screen. And then, like, I was talking to my other guest the other day, and he's a producer, and he's like an artist, and I was like, man, how much of the process takes away from the creativity, man? You know, and he was like, he told me some interesting things about that. So, but I think I have you set up here, and you know what? I think we're just gonna fire this up, man. I have one of these bands that are playing that were nominated for the Junos, and they're called Downchild Blues Band. And one of their songs is called Mississippi Woman, Mississauga Man. It's so freaking good, man. It's so good. On their 2017 album. It's really good.
Well, I could pick up a baseball and throw it right now. Literally from where I'm standing, I could pick up a baseball and throw it and hit one of Donnie Walsh's best friend's cabin.
Donnie Walsh.
My buddy knows Donnie Walsh really well. He's the bass player he's the leader of Downchild's Blues Band.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Oh, snap, man. See, like, that's crazy. I've only gotten to know him since the Junos, but that's incredible. That must be very exciting for him, man.
I don't care if I die. We play that.
Nice. Well, welcome to the show, man. Thanks for coming on. And I was going to talk about this idea that my show is very interesting on how I introduce my guests, because there are people that have been on the show that I know very well, and I kind of have an idea of how to introduce them based on the experiences that we've had and all that. But then there are people who, like you, who've left a huge impression on my life, but we are essentially strangers. We don't really talk except for those like sporadic Facebook posts that you have or I have, and you kind of catch up on that way. And so before doing this show, the concept is I do some research on and background on my guests, and I did some background through you on LinkedIn. So your profile on LinkedIn. I wanted to ask you, how accurate is your online profile, my man?
Well, I think it's accurate, but a lot of stuff I would say pretty accurate.
Okay. You know, I feel, I don't know what you think about the whole the LinkedIn game. Like, essentially, some people use it as a lifeline to look for new jobs. It's a very, very, I guess, like, it's a form of online professional identity. But when I looked at your profile, it was very down to earth. It was very like matter of fact. Hey, man, this is me. I've done this for a long time. You know, what do you want, man? It's like, it was really good. It wasn't like in your face too much, but I that's how I got from your profile.
Good, then I did it right.
And I didn't even know you were in Ontario. I thought you were still in Alberta, but you've been traveling quite a bit.
Yeah, I've lived in all provinces and territories except Newfoundland.
Tell me, wow, incredible. And I thought I was
definable.
Yep. Tell me a little bit about yourself, Cam. Like, where you're from, where you were born, where you moved, and then our experiences crossed paths, I guess, like 9 years ago, which you probably don't really remember that much, all too much, but I
totally remember it.
Yeah. Cool, man. Tell me a little bit. Introduce you're sort of like we're strangers, man. You know. You tell me a little bit about yourself.
Okay. All right. So I'll start with an interesting anecdote. I just saw you tagged me in the thing that says, um, "Where is Cam Lockerbie now?" or whatever it is. There's another Cam Lockerbie who lives in Medicine Hat, who's just about my age, who went into the profession that when I came out of high school, I thought I was going to do. He's a musician too. We get mixed up all the time on email because he knows my cousin. So it's Cam Lockerbie's a rather unusual name.
Right.
And to have two that know the same person in Medicine Hat, it was anyway. He's gone out of his way on his internet presence to differentiate himself as not me.
Oh my gosh. Wait, so you are from the area then?
Yeah, I grew up in Southern Alberta in Calgary.
Dude, yep. That's crazy, man. Like that's
old school Alberta.
Yeah. Because I've been out here for the last couple of years, and I didn't even know that.
Yeah. So if you ever have any questions about stuff in Calgary, like we were talking earlier about Brooks, yeah. I had family in Medicine Hat, so we used to drive down from 1974 to 1984. I bet you I went to Medicine Hat 30 times a year, which meant I went through Brooks 30 times a year, which meant I smelled Brooks 30 times a year.
You know, it's not that bad, man. It's not the defining characteristic. It used to
be way worse. It used to be way, way, way worse. It's cleaned up totally. It's cleaned up a lot.
Right. Because that is a defining thing. If you look up Brooks, it's like the top 10 things about Brooks and why you shouldn't live here. And I feel like it gives this place a bad rap. I've had a pretty good time here since I've been here. It's a smaller town. I'm from a bigger city, but yeah, that is one of those aspects about the city. So you were born and raised in Alberta.
Yep, absolutely. My uncle was a veterinarian. So part of my growing up is I grew up in Calgary and all the city stuff. But when I was young and stupid, I've been with my uncle the vet when you've had to have a calf that didn't want to come out. It was a breech calf, and there's only one way to fix that. The veterinarian has to go in and grab it. And so he hasn't got any leverage when he's got his hands on hold of the calf. So there's the vet, my uncle, and then my dad pulling on him, and then me pulling on my dad, and then 2 or 3 of my cousins pulling on me to. So that's an Alberta story.
Wow.
That's the kind of thing that, well, I guess it's not really an Alberta story. It's a country story, but.
There's a lot of those stories. I have a lot of my students who come from farming backgrounds, and they share a lot of stories that kind of, I go, wow, that is really different from how I got raised, how I was raised. And yeah. Which part of, so you were in Calgary, in that vicinity. So you saw how Calgary kind of changed over the years. Cause I also had another friend of mine. Yeah. I've had another friend of mine who was raised in Calgary, and he talked about the significant changes that city went through growing up.
So when my family moved to Calgary, my backyard was Downey's farm. I could literally go out my back door and walk for 25 miles and not hit nothing but fences.
Wow.
Now that same spot in Calgary on Sage Hill, wherever it is a fully 30 kilometers from where I was. And the city is it's just so changed. I moved back in 2012, and all the landmarks were changed. I moved back the week they knocked down the Telstar, or not knocked down, they removed the Telstar drugs thing, which was a landmark, a total landmark. It's in the Glenbow now, but that was a huge thing to go to that. And that was the first chicken on the way. The chicken on the way at the corner of 4th Street in Kensington was the first chicken on the way, I think, in Canada.
There's one in Brooks.
I'm not sure. There's one in Brooks now, but the chicken on the way at the fort was the very first chicken on the way.
Oh, wow.
And, it was another thing that was in in Calgary, when I grew up, one of the things you could do on a Sunday night was go up to Circle 8 Speedway, which was where there's the mall up there at the when you Center Street, and you go past Beddington and then past the bus trap there, and then you go up that hill, and then there's a mall there. I can't remember what it's called, but that mall is sitting on the old racetrack.
Wow.
So you could hear when we were kids on Sunday night, you could hear the stock cars whipping around up there. Not anymore.
Things have
Not
changed.
anymore.
I maybe you can talk a little bit about how bus rides were 5 cents a pop.
Boss. Oh, yes. Okay. The first time I ever got on a bus to do something by myself, I paid a nickel. It was on the number 2 Mount Pleasant bus. And I think you got that off my Facebook page because they had a posting of the number 2 Mount Pleasant bus from back in my era. And then they had the same bus now.
Huh.
I actually know it was the number 3 bus. I'm sorry. Similar routes. Yes, the first time I ever got on a bus is I went down to go play basketball at my sister's church down in it was for those Calgary, it was Grace Presbyterian on down by 17th, or I guess it's 15th Avenue, in the Cool Hood now. Anyway, it was a whole nickel.
Wow. What has
But back in
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, but and that's another thing. I couldn't have been 10. So these days, do you let a 9-year-old get on a bus unaccompanied? I think you might catch heck from people that monitor parents if you did that. I don't think they do that anymore.
It makes national news. I remember reading about a guy who did it and said, like, I'd like my daughters to be able to ride the bus and use public transit by themselves without my supervision, and like all kinds of people were getting upset about it.
Yeah.
But that was like a norm, I guess, like back in the day, like, even when I was growing up, and we're not that far apart in age, but I think it's changed drastically, this whole stranger danger, man.
Yeah.
Oh God.
And I wonder what that says about how society has changed. I wonder why it changed that way. Because I don't think there's any more for lack of a word, malicious intent. I don't think it's any more or any less. I just think this medium that we're using right now makes it so much more aware, and then the awareness builds fear, and then the fear. So there like you say, it makes national news.
So okay, so I'm gonna go on that point here. Awareness breeds fear. I think that's true because you start to learn about all kinds of interesting and crazy and things that you've never thought of on your own. Could I argue that sometimes it could also breed creativity, and this awareness can breed.
Oh, totally.
How do we walk that super thin line, and balance that?
Okay, hang on 2 seconds. I want to use a visual prop for this because it will make perfect sense. I'll be right back.
All right.
30 seconds.
Sure, take it. For those of you joining us, I don't see this chat. Anyone's joining us here tonight? Oh, nice. We've got a couple of viewers, I think. Thanks for joining us.
Okay, so it's a shame you don't have smell-o-vision because
it hasn't not around yet.
Not yet, but okay. I don't know how that. There you go. What do you think this is? It's not weed. It's food.
Not exactly. I don't know. Some sort of.
That's garam masala.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I know what that is. Spice.
So so I now know it's the central backbone of Indian cooking.
Yes.
I would not have any cause to have ever run into anything that constitutes Indian cooking without this medium that we're on. When you were saying about breeding creativity, I don't know, maybe I'm jumping ahead, but you and I know each other through Brian.
Yes.
And Brian Brian's family are, really creative cooks, and uh, the fact that I'm using garam masala now indicates that how could I would not have ever had any occasion at all to have anything Indian, because it's, when I think of Indian, it's just, I think wicked, wicked hot spice, and that's not me.
Right.
But it's not.
Yeah, no, it's it's
So
it's a it's a strange herb that kind of, or like spice that just adds a kick. I would
yeah,
argue, right?
so it's a bunch of spices. It's coriander, and it's about 8 spices that you throw into a blender, and away you go. And it's such an adventure. And I only did that like about this is only like about 6 weeks old that I tried it, and I go, oh, this really makes chicken salad go.
Okay. Okay, fine. I like that. I feel like you're kind of selling yourself short, given the idea that you'd never come across that without the internet, though. Because okay, so for my understanding is that and I'm making leaps here in your period of moving. So you from Calgary, you decided to move east, and you ended up staying in Toronto for a couple of years, and that move is from a smaller place to a larger city, correct? So I
Oh
mean
yeah, well,
under that train of thought, you are someone who's sort of open-minded and willing to try new things and look for and inevitable. Like the garam masala was inevitable, Cam.
fair enough, fair enough.
I don't know, man. Tell,
Yeah,
tell me a little bit of why yeah, how did you end up, or all the provinces and all the territories that you've lived in? You
oh,
can talk a little bit about that.
okay, so grew up in Calgary, and a brief period in my time, um, I lived in BC, and then after Calgary, went up to the Arctic. I lived in Yellowknife, and then after Yellowknife, my ex and I we moved to Ottawa, and then from Ottawa, then we moved to Toronto. And these are like the big moves. There's small moves in between, but those are the big moves. And then from Toronto out to PEI, and then back to Calgary, with short short stays in Saskatchewan and Manitoba, a little while in Quebec, and I guess it depends how you define lived.
Mm,
I might be stretching a little bit on New Brunswick, but
right. But you've been all over Canada.
oh yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
that's really cool, because I think that a lot of us who are Canadian, I'm not speaking for all of us, but many of us who consider themselves Canadian have only seen a very small part of this country. And whether or not it is our responsibility to at least know about these places, but even seeing it, or traveling to these places, I find to be important to build our identity. And what is identity anyway? I was talking to my friend today, and she was like, "Well, the Canadian identity is a very fractured one. We don't really know how do you really encapsulate such an incredible big thing into one piece." So I find that living places all around the country definitely brings more perspective, though. So kudos to you, man.
Well, one of the things that I think builds the Canadian identity is when Canada was being forged as a country, people who have only ever lived in urban areas don't know what it's like to live on the frontier. It's a different game when you can't go to the store, when you can't call the doctor, when your teeth hurt, and the closest dentist is 16 days away that you have to get to by your horse. It ain't going to happen. So when you're on the frontier, you need to be able to rely on the people around you. It's hard to imagine sitting in a condo in Saga what that means when anything that you need to do, as long as you've got an active Visa card, you can make it work, right? In When Canada was being forged, as it were, that wasn't true for a whole bunch of us. for the proportion. So, like for instance, my mom, she, they used to, when school let out, they used to go to a cabin in the woods. The only way in was by train, and they'd spend 4 months in the summer, 3 months in the summer on a lake. And the only way in was by the train, and you'd take in 3 weeks worth or 3 months worth of supplies at the start. You come out at the end, and she wasn't anything special. All her buddies and everybody had that story, and that kind of that requirement that we live in such a big place that you need to rely on the dude beside you, whether you like him or not. You gotta rely on him because you're gonna have to rely on him, and he's eventually gonna have to rely on you.
Mhm.
Kind of puts, to me, it was a filter that uh, folks that, or the element that would have been, oh, I don't know, nefarious or, for lack of a better word, assholes, they got weeded out. And
Mm.
so folks that weren't were the ones that were able to survive. Oh man, have you been through a? Well, this was a good cold winter this year, wasn't it?
It was really cold,
Could
man.
you imagine doing the winter that you just went through without the benefit of modern shelter
Yeah.
or the benefit of propane or electric heat? Could you imagine doing this winter with in a sod hut? Oh, it'd be harsh.
You remind me of the days when I read about Susanna Moody and some of these original people who arrived as settlers and to try to make it in the thick of the bush. It's like rough. It was called. I think what her book was called, "Roughing It in the Bush."
It's right there over on the shelf.
And
My
those
mom has
stories,
that as a reader.
those stories are
Also,
incredible, man. And you're totally right about that. Now, it makes me think about this idea of like how Canada is now, because of those attitudes and that settler invader mentality to survive. It was necessary. It comes to a point where this country is so big now. It's like it develops these things called regional disparity, or I guess like
oh,
these areas where now we don't know each other, provinces from provinces. Like born and raised in Ontario, or like raised in Ontario. Like I didn't know any other provinces until honestly until I went out to that trip and I drove out to Prince Edward Island, man. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. But back to this idea of how Canada is fractured in a way because of it's as a necessity. What do you think about that?
and so therein lies the big thing about Canada is what you experienced growing up in. I think you were in Saga.
Yeah, all my life, man.
Okay, so growing up in Saga, the things that are important for you, how you got to school, the stuff that kept you safe in your schoolyard, the things you needed to be able, the clothes you needed to be able to wear, the movies you needed to be able to watch, all that good stuff is so utterly different than what I had in Calgary, what somebody had in Nova Scotia, that somebody had, oh, in Yellowknife. Oh, one of the way you can tell somebody who's truly from the Arctic is that they know all the names of all the Detroit sports teams,
Okay.
because the only cable that you got was beamed in direct off the Anik feed, which is the Detroit TVs. So you got all your cable off of Anik 1, and it was CBC, CTV, and ABC, NBC, and CBS out of Detroit. So when you run around in the high Arctic, um, or everybody's got a Stevie Eiserman jersey on, or they've got a Joe Doomers.
Wow,
I
that
just
is
dated
cool.
myself there, but anyway. So it's the fact that this is, I heard a joke the other few years back that stuck with me. What is the difference between Canada and Europe? In Canada, 100 years is a long time, and in Europe, 100 kilometers is a long way.
Ooh, that's good. That is
So
very pithy. That's a good one. Yeah, that's true.
so to answer your question, the fracturedness comes from the fact that the geography, you can never, when you're discussing the Canadian identity, you can never divide geography out of the equation. It never comes. It
Absolutely.
always is a factor that's irreducible from the. You can never take it out of solution, I guess.
Absolutely. And in defense of Canadians and how some of us criticize us for not being well informed and traveled. Oftentimes I hear people telling me like, well, look at Europe, like Europeans seem to know they're always in the know. They're always talking about something that's like serious and up to date and informed. And then you look at Canadians and, they're not as politically inclined. And then I go, well, look, I mean, it's not like Canadians don't want to travel, man. Canadians want to travel, but it's expensive and it's
Expensive.
hard
Hard.
and it's difficult.
Exactly.
And so then you can't blame some of us who try so hard. Like, I made an effort. I made a concerted effort to travel, and it wasn't easy. And now even to consider myself traveling all over the country, people think I'm like, some people ask me, why do I put it on myself to travel the country when you could just stay in wherever I'm from, right? And I don't blame them because it's hard. It's difficult. Whereas Europeans can travel,
Yes.
like you said right there, that joke. It's like 100 kilometers and you go through like 3-4 countries.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
yeah, no. Tell me a little bit more about your travels, man. Like, what do you enjoy about the country? What has traveling the country done for you as a person?
Um, I know the cliche answer is broaden my horizons but it has. Uh, it makes you realize what things are common, or made me realize what things are common, what things are different. For instance, Tofino. You get folks that go to Tofino and gravitate to Tofino are not the same people that would gravitate to Fort McLeod or Carstairs. And yet, when you boil all that crap away, they just want to cheer for their hockey team, whether or not that's the Flames, the Oilers, or the Knuckleheads. It those things, they're all the same, but they're different because you're in different spots, and I guess the answer is it's taken me from if I can use a food metaphor, it's taken me from a French chef to a fusion chef.
Hmm. Okay. And this whole, like you were just mentioning, the hockey speak. Hockey speak is very important in Canada. I think it's a huge part of.
Oh, just a little.
and yet, if you were right now in Toronto, if you walk into certain neighborhoods, hockey
Hmm.
won't necessarily come up, and it's just as Canadian as it is, but it's just like, it's funny because sports is a huge defining part of this country, and yet there are people who don't talk about it at all. And so you've experienced it, this, you've been in Toronto, you've lived there for a while, I don't know, it's like I'm trying to wrap my head. For the longest time I was like, Cam, okay, my hockey, I never grew up watching hockey because essentially I've thought about it, and for a large part of my life I lived under the rock. Popular culture in Canada, I'd never had the opportunity to do it, never to see it, because my parents never gave us TV. I come from a immigrant Chinese family. A lot of what my dad passed down to me, like, I mean, this hockey and music and all these popular cultural things, usually your parents the common trend is your parents pass that down to you. I never had any of that, so I grew up with this huge gap of knowledge. I never had like a team, and I knew I was growing up with a few friends of mine who was like an Oasis and a New Jersey Devils fan, and I never knew who they were growing up, man. And it was like, and then I lost out on all that conversation. My question to you is, how important is it and how necessary is it for people to understand the bigger topics and bigger things that are happening in the place that they live in.
Oh, totally, totally. Okay, totally understanding. So if we're going to bring up you had mentioned that you'd lived under a rock. Okay, for a lot of Canadians, they live under a rock. We're so insular, and it's absolutely vitally important right now in my mind that we, because it's so hard right now to do what I'm about to ask or suggest people to do. Okay. Do you and anybody in your family, were there any mahjong players?
Oh, absolutely, yes. Yeah.
Okay. So you know as well as I do, you can lose your soul playing mahjong.
Yes. It's a
So
game of
in
gambling. It's a
Yellowknife,
gambling game. Yes, that's absolutely.
okay. So in Yellowknife, there was a certain restaurant that maintained the bulk of its staff from people who were drawn from mahjong games who had lost too much, and this is how they worked off their debt. If I tell you that, it's like I'm telling you, oh, it's snowing out. You know this to be true. You know I'm not making up a story, right?
Right.
If I tell that to anybody well, not anybody, but a lot of the people in my circle of friends, they know I'm making up a story. They know I'm telling a cam story. They know that what I said is not possibly true in 2018.
Right.
And you and I both know it. Duh, it's happening right now. So we need, and those guys' Canadians' experience is just as valid as mine.
Right.
And some of those people came over to the Gold Mountain. They've been here. They were here. Their family's been here longer than mine.
Right.
So
now that's funny. Now that's a really interesting perspective. It's like this idea of being able to have like a spokesperson to validate some of these experiences that are so insular. Man, dude, that's crazy, man. Like, because right now what's happening is that there are all these experiences that are unspoken. There are stories that are untold, and we're left to try to make sense of these things. And in the process of trying to make sense of things, we get lambasted by people who think that we're trying to stereotype. Like, they'll be like, oh, you're trying to stereotype a certain perspective. You're doing something to, and that's a problem, because what happens is, I don't know if you've been following Jordan Peterson. It makes me think of him. This university professor who talks about this idea of compelled speech, this idea that, look, a lot of people are judging us for what we say, and as a result, stopping us from telling stories and trying to understand the complexities of this nation. I don't know, man. Like,
totally. I haven't heard of the guy, but yeah, that's a part of me, because there's stories I don't tell anymore. For exactly that reason.
Right.
I know that my perspective of what I feel safe about talking about has shrunk. Mm-hmm. Totally.
Yeah, man, that's part of the reason why I think this country needs conversations like these. Like, just being able to chat, and that's let's talk a little bit about when we truly met. When the first time I met you, we've met because we used to work at a place in Toronto called Millennium Care. Give them a name drop right now, and I used to work night shifts.
You worked at M-Care?
I worked at M-Care, man. That's why I know that you didn't remember that part. I worked at M-Care because Brian, our mutual friend, was the guy who got me the position there, and at the time I dropped out of university. Funny thing, I dropped out of university, and I was kind of like walking around I was like figuring out my life, and I was like, okay, maybe I get a job. Brian's like, well, come work for this tech company. And David, you remember David, what's his name? He worked with us. He was sort of the lead supervisor or in my department. Dave Hall. Right. And so I got hired on board, and I was working there, and I knew of you because you were in the other part of the building, like you were on the other side, but we never talked. I only talked through Brian, and through it all, that company moves out east, and you guys were essentially the guys who took that company on your very backs and moved that entire company
literally.
Literally.
And
you can share a story about that and I want you to tell me about that a little bit. But
Oh,
how we met was that I drove out there to pick Brian up from Prince Edward Island to bring him back.
that's right.
And so our relationship ended up the spark happened in a kitchen somewhere in
Yep.
Summerside, PEI, and we were shucking
Yep.
oysters that night, and it was the greatest experience I've
Yep.
ever had, out east.
And we had moonshine.
We had moonshine. That's right. Yeah. Oh man. So that's how. Yeah. All convoluted. But maybe tell me a little bit about your time in Toronto and how you met Brian and eventually moving out east and stories about that.
Okay. So, did you ever know Radu? You probably didn't know Radu.
No, I don't think
Great
so.
big guy. Okay. So, Radu got me into MCare, and I got into MCare because of that specific contract. And we can bring up Trevor. And Trevor's no longer with us, so I can say this without too much. Trevor was a member of Anonymous. Trevor was a dude that if he decided he was coming into your computer, the only way you were going to keep him out was to turn the computer off and break the hard drive. If you did anything less than that, he was coming in because he was one of them. He was one of those guys that computers did not pose any sort of a barrier to him at all. But he was kind of hard to work with. So when Brian came on board, it became clear that there was a real strata of technical skill. Brian was in that strata. Trevor was in that strata. I wasn't, but I talked a good game.
Okay.
And my trick was that I could write tickets that there's a boatload of my tickets that just get pulled, copied and pasted and put into procedure manuals because it's my thing.
You're a technical writer.
I'm a technical writer and I make my tickets reflect that. So MCare back in that recession in 28 or 208, I'm pretty sure what happened was the guy who was running MCare went to university with the premier of PEI. I'm not 100% sure on this, but the sweetheart deal that was cut up was not something that was done negotiating businessman to businessman. This was buddy to buddy. And so what happened is Brian and Trevor and I got in a truck and we rented a 26-foot truck and we loaded up all of MCare's gear and we went out to PEI and we started the call center and it was just the three of us. And then eventually they hired a bunch of local hires and got another couple contracts. And ultimately because they got those contracts, MCare was bought out by a couple of years back.
Can I say that was actually quite a noble move? I mean, I don't think there were a lot of companies and organizations like jumping at the opportunity to move east.
No.
And they hired local.
Yep.
I don't know if you can speak to that.
It was a condition of the deal. And what made hiring local so cool is because the PEI government picked up 80% of the wage.
Oh. What?
So they got.
That's outrageous. Yeah. How could you?
Outrageous.
How could you possibly snake someone for 80% of the wage?
Because if you're a politician, you can now say, "Look at how many jobs I created," wow. And he literally did.
That's crazy, man.
Yeah, it was some wild times.
All right, so
we almost didn't make it.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so short answer. This story could turn into a 1,000-hour story, but I'll keep it short. The moose stopped. We couldn't. The moose did. Just outside of Woodstock, New Brunswick, a moose came onto the road. We couldn't have stopped. We were bracing. We knew we were going to die, and the moose turned around and jumped back into the ditch.
Wow.
If that moose hadn't turned, we would have been going highway speed in the 26-foot, U-Haul and had a moose hit you right there, the moose would have came over, and Brian and Trevor and I would have been hit by a 1-ton moose going 50 miles an hour, and it would have bust us in half. We wouldn't have been able to survive that. But the moose didn't want to die that day, so it turned around and went in the ditch.
Yikes, man.
We're sitting there looking at each other.
Wow.
I got the tingles. I got the tingles. I can't tell that story and not get the tingles.
Damn, man. That is such a Canadian story, driving down the highway.
Oh, it is such a Canadian story. We almost didn't make it because of a moose.
That's incredible.
Yeah, when we got there, and when we got there, and people would ask me about, well, what's the difference between Toronto and PEI? And I tell them, when I got up to drive for that trip, the sound that woke me up was the police car and escorting a ambulance into St. Mike's. They were escorting a gangland shooting.
So you had just arrived. You guys were sleeping in the car in this U-Haul.
We did. Okay, so what we did is we got up. The sound of the siren woke me up that day, and what started on that day was loading Brian and Trevor and I into the van, and that took from however much in the morning, and we didn't leave Toronto until 11 o'clock that night. And then we drove 24 and a half hours to PEI, and then pulled into the parking lot at what's now the Holland College, and we slept in the back of the van. And the sound that woke, so that's, we haven't slept in however many hours, 26, 28 hours since we slept. And the sound that woke me up next was the dude sitting there in a rowboat with those big long forks digging oysters off the bottom, and he's throwing back his rejects. It's going bloop, bloop. So that's the difference. In PEI, you get woken up by oyster rejects, and in Toronto, you get woken up by sirens tearing into St. Mike's. And that to me encapsulates the difference.
And how did that, like, you must have been like, this is something you never thought you would, because you were from the west side, man. Like, and that's a prairie.
Thought I was going to be in PEI. Yeah, here's a prairie boy out in the East Coast. It was an adventure.
Yeah, and now
here's another adventure.
And now, like, from what I've experienced the last couple of years, I know that there's a lot of people from out east coming out west to work.
Yep.
For whatever industry. But there's a lot of East Coasters that are out here, and especially in Yellowknife. Actually, there's a huge East Coast community up that way.
Yeah, they all work in the mine.
Huh.
Yep. Or I guess the Yellowknife doesn't have two mines anymore. When I lived there, the story about Yellowknife when I lived there was Yellowknife is this city where the gold is paved with streets.
Gold is paved with
streets. Because the gold mine was literally under the streets of Yellowknife. So when they would do their blasting, you'd shake, right?
Oh my gosh!
So when the first real earthquake came through, everybody that was a miner freaked out because this isn't the right time for a blast, and they went running. This was long before the internet, so they had to all phone and go running out to the mine to find out what was going on. It was nothing. It was an earthquake, but I guess an earthquake isn't nothing, but it wasn't. Everybody thought it was an unscheduled blast in the mine, which is an absolute disaster, and people were panicked.
When was this?
So that would have been 80. Was I married then? No. So it would have been about this time of year, 86.
Yeah, because now it's a service industry up there. A lot of people, like, there's all walks of life. I've met a lot of people in Yellowknife when I was there for a couple of days for traveling, and there's a huge service industry because people like to go up there to watch the skies. They like the skies. They like the idea of, like, the snowshoeing and the racing. But now I got
to put in a plug for Raven Tours.
Okay.
In Japanese culture, it is considered the height of good fortune to have your child conceived under the Northern Lights.
Oh, big business.
So there's a guy, entrepreneur, who's tapped into this, and he started in 87 or 8. He has a Japanese wife, so she can has access to the, and what he built was a niche industry where he's built these cabins out on the shores of one of the lakes, and you fly into Yellowknife and you go stay in the cabins, you watch the northern lights, and you create children with the absolute maximum auspiciousness, I guess is the word.
Nice. Whoa, you gave him a plug, man. That's good. I want to do that, man. That's awesome. Oh, that's funny. East Coast, with the whole, we have a national character, cultural character. What's her name? Out in PEI is the story of
Anna Green Gables.
Anna Green Gables, and the Japanese love her.
Yes. Off the scale. Off the scale. I don't understand it, and I've had, that at the UPEI you can do a PhD in AND studies, right?
I didn't know that.
That's not a joke. You can actually do a PhD in AND studies. The story I've been told, I knew a professor at UPEI, and she told me about how it's the independent spirit of Anne just strikes a chord with the Japanese culture. It just rings, and they just can't get enough of her. So if you go to up in Cavendish, you go to Lucy Maud Montgomery's house. If you go there during tourist season, it's just a stereotype. Did you go do that when you were there? Did we take you up that way?
No, we didn't have time, man. Dude, yeah. I did that trip in 4 days, there and back. I put
2 for driving.
Yeah, I put 4,000 kilometers on that Charger, man. I got back and I handed the car back in, and they were like,
right, it was a Charger.
Dude, they looked at it and they were like, "What did you do? Where did you go?" I don't know, man. And talking about not making it back, like, man, we were so tired. Like, Brian and I were really tired driving that whole way back too. It was pretty intense, but would never trade that for anything else. But yeah, no. So how long were you in PEI for?
I was there just short of 4 years. Just short of just over. I got there in 9 and moved out in 12. So 10 would have been 1 year, 11 2 years, 12, 13, so just over 3 years.
And then you headed back to Toronto.
Well, actually, I was on my way out to Calgary. So I went out of PEI and I stayed here in Ontario for a bit, and then went back to Calgary in January 13.
You know,
just in time to see.
Sorry, just in time to see.
Just in time, like I said, just in time to see the Telstar drugs sign taken down, and there was something else happened that was that week in Calgary as well, like that.
The Olympics?
An old piece of the. No. The Olympics is another story. I was in Yellowknife for the Olympics, but one of the coolest things in my early life was on the Olympics when it was on ABC that year. And when the Olympics started, Olympic coverage started, how the helicopter came in from Calgary down the Bow Valley, and it flew over the Olympic site and then down over the west part of Calgary and over the university. And I realized this guy's flying down North Mount Drive. And as he's going down North Mount Drive, I grew up basically at the end of North Mount Drive. And as he's coming down North Mount Drive, and I'm going, "You're going to fly over my house. You're going to fly over my house. You're going to fly over." And then he turned. So he didn't. He turned flew over my school, but he didn't fly over my house.
Nice. So you know a few things about long distance travel, Cam?
I do.
And especially in Canada, where the road leads you from one place to another. It was just connected by one road, really. This whole country. So yeah, no, cool, man. Thanks for sharing all that. And there's okay, here are some things that I've done. So I named this episode Canadian Pastime because I know that you have a lot of different ones. So maybe I'll ask you to talk a little bit about some of these here. I also want to thank you. I've done some research. I remember on my Kindle collection, there's a book called Chasing the Scream, and I've always wondered where I got that title from. And after going through your Facebook, I realized it was you. I actually you posted it, and I learned a lot about Billie Holiday and her career and her addictions, and that was all
Mm-hmm.
through that book. So I want to thank you for that. But here are some interesting things about the internet: is that we can connect with all these. What is? Can you talk a little bit about roller rinks?
Oh, roller rinks, Lloyd's. Okay.
Is this a Canadian thing?
Oh yeah.
Okay. See, look, I'm telling you, man,
So
I'm living under a rock. I'm revealing all this.
if you're from a certain era, going on a date at a roller rink was really, really important. By the time I'm coming along, I'm at the end of it for sure. I'm at the end of it. But a couple of weeks ago, Lloyd's had its last, and I absolutely positively remember taking in, I guess it would be junior high school. We had to go down there as a class in lifetime activities, and we went and we did roller skating. And a Saturday afternoon or Sunday afternoon at Lloyd's, from where I was, it was a big deal to get down there. And but oh boy, that was when new age music was just coming in, and so we were roller skating, and it's a combination of the Ramones and the Sex Pistols meets uh, Eric Clapton. It was an interesting time. Of course, it was fun.
Okay,
Lloyd's
so
was a lot of fun.
that sort of music that was coming out, the new age music coming out, was that sort of did adults were adults upset with that sort of music? Did they look at that and frown
Oh,
upon it?
oh yeah, oh yeah. It,
Mm.
it was the Ramones were going to destroy the world. What's going to happen to the youth of our? Oh, it's the same thing as
Yeah.
every generation's got the same. Ours happened to be punk.
Right, 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 right. And
People actually wore those long, when you take the 13 pounds of hair gel and it comes out like in that Pepsi commercial. They weren't making fun of that guy. I knew guys that wore hair like that, man.
nice. That's awesome. That's awesome. All right, so you must be really good then.
No, no, no. I was a horrible skater. Horrible skater. And how I found out I was a horrible skater is when I got married. My ex wasn't a horrible skater. She was a figure skating coach.
Oh, okay.
And so she saw me skate and it almost made her barf.
Nice. Old school, man, and like street level, like street, man. And it wasn't. There was no professional training. It was all, you know, all poise,
Oh,
natural
yeah.
poise.
Yeah, when I was a hockey player, I have to admit I was a goon. I
Okay.
got I got big. I got big when I was 12. So by the time I'm 13, I'm 50 pounds and 6 inches on top of everybody else. So what do you do when you're that big and you've got old school coaches?
Huh.
You turn into a goon. When you can't skate, you turn into a goon. Speaking of goons, when we were talking about the Canadian identity, 1972 September series. Every Canadian alive who remembers it can tell you what they were doing for every one of those games. They're etched upon us. So when I was in Yellowknife, I was a sports writer. I really did get paid to write about sports, and because of that, when I was leaving Yellowknife, right at the end, it was just when um, getting CDs to watch, not just listen to the music, but getting a CD to put into a machine to watch on TV. That was new and cool. And one of the things that came out on there on that new and cool medium was all the raw footage of the 72 series. And that was, or Canada beat Russia. I guess for folks that might be seeing this don't understand that was every human being in Canada who was able to see a TV did. We were
Hmm.
all there. We all did it. It's not a story. It's not an exaggeration. It's the reason my dad bought a color TV. It's everybody who was around then has a similar story. And when I watched that, because that was a part, I was what, grade 9ish, or no, 9 years oldish. Um, when I watched it with the eye of a sports writer 20 years later, 30 years later, whatever it was, I was absolutely blown away at just how dirty that hockey was. I mean, it's some of the most savage, blatant disregards. Well, if you want to understand the Canadian psyche fully, you have to understand why Ted Lindsay or Harry Sinden could tell Bobby Clark to go out and deliberately break Valerie Harlamov's leg. There was no sport involved. This was a simple assault that should have got him charged. He went out with the deliberate attempt to break that man's leg, and he did. And nobody and Bobby Clark is considered, like, rightly so, a Canadian icon in hockey because, well, he's Bobby Clark. He led the Flyers to the he basically carried the Flyers to the Stanley Cup. Nobody, I'm not going to say nothing bad about Bobby Clark ever, but
Mm-hmm.
you still have to acknowledge that he went out and deliberately, that's conspiracy. He had a man tell him to commit a criminal act and he went out and did it. That is by definition conspiracy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yet that moment, we consider that to be like right up there with Confederation. For old school Canadians, that's right up there. And like the number of people that wanted to that year to really wanted Phil Esposito to tap him out of hockey and put him in as the prime minister, Phil would have won in the landslide. So where I'm going with this is that we've got this image as Canadians in the world as we wear the blue berets, we're the peacekeepers, we're the good people. What's that ad where it's the Canadian and it's for one of the banks where the two guys are trying to pay for each other with the
Oh, right. The BMO. Yeah.
okay, yeah, the BMO ad.
Yeah.
Okay, that doesn't work if you don't understand how polite and nice Canadians are. At the same time, these nice, polite Canadians at our absolute apex of Canadian male sporting domination includes criminal conspiracy. Can't have one without the other, man.
Yeah.
It's we were talking about the Canadian experience, and it really it shook me just how violent those games were. Because I thought, this is the epitome of the NHL and all these da, 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 da. No. When you're harpooning a guy, you're not playing nice. Oh, the on a hockey player, the place where you've got no padding back in those days is behind your leg. So the back of your leg, so all of the front of your body is padded so that the point of a stick when shoved at you ain't going to cause any damage except the back of your leg. So it's called a Russian spear. I know it's a slur. I'm sure we did it too. But the idea is that when the guy's skating by you, that's where you get them and you cramp them up. They did it, and if you watch the game, you can count the number of Russian spears. You count easily 100, all of which would get you banned from the NHL today.
No kidding.
Anyway, I digress. Sorry.
No. I want to jump on that. Like, you're growing up as a hockey player. How has that changed the landscape? Like, this country still has a huge fascination with the game. So as a teacher, I know that there are a lot of my students who during the hockey season are the busiest individuals I've ever met. And they're 12, 13, 14 years old. And they're driving, from Brooks to Medicine Hat for their games 3-4 times a week. And like, has that changed at any point? Do you know if you can talk a little bit about that?
Oh, absolutely. And it was that series that helped trigger the change, because before that series, hockey was just something we did. We were Canadian, so we knew how to be hockey players, man. And you had your uncle coach you, and then you went out there, and there's good guys did it, and we just naturally went out and won, and nobody cared. 72 series comes along, and if we hadn't outgooned them, we wouldn't have won. We won because we won because we broke Valerie Harlamov's leg. If he was a the best way to describe him was a Paul Coffey-esque. Valery Harlamov was the fastest skater in the world at the time. He just nobody could catch him. Nobody. He just blow by in. So anyway, so that was the year that the Canadians decided we better start taking hockey as a something to do, like to treat it as a uh, what am I trying to say here? Actually train as athletes, find out things about what does nutrition do.
Hmm.
Will a training regimen actually help you? Will weights help you be a better hockey player? If you deliberately practice stick handling, uh, practice the team of hockey away from the ice. All these things that all of a sudden we took hockey out of something that we did because we're Canadians into an actual science,
Mm.
and that's the game that your kids are playing now. Uh, Unrecognizable from the one I played, except that there's pucks and ice and sticks.
Right.
An interesting story about Brooks. The last play I ever played in hockey in my career, and this is how I knew my hockey career was over. There was a team we were playing from Brooks, and the dude, I was a defenseman at the time, and the dude came in and he parked himself in front of the net. And at the time, I was a reasonably strong athlete, and I had my stick. I was cross checking him right on the point of his hip. So this should be making him move. And I was hitting him as hard as I could. And I had my skate edge dug in and I was pushing as hard as I could. And he was trying not to move and I couldn't move him for all the tea in China. And I realized that, no, I can't do this. A defenseman needs to be able to move a winger out in front of the net, and I couldn't move him, and I was just pushing. I couldn't do any more to make him move, and that was one of the moments when I realized that no, hockey's for somebody else. I was disappointed as hell, but because
So,
when you're a kid, everybody knows they're going to make the NHL, right?
right. Wow. Brooks is huge into hockey, Cam.
Oh, every place in Alberta is huge into hockey. It's part of the thing.
Yeah. We had a really good defenseman who I think got drafted in the NHL last year. Carl McCarr, and the whole town is behind him, and the town is really, and interestingly, the idea is that I revere one of my colleagues, my principal actually, and he kind of brought up this idea that uh, local sports, like why do you watch local sports, right? I always like, there's the NHL, there's the NFL, there's NCAA even, and all these other bigger organizations. Why do you watch local sports? It's because I mean, that's what he does. He spends his entire time just watching local events and local teams because he feels that there is a level of connection there. And funny, because back home where I grew up, my friends were more interested in the bigger leagues and not really focused on the smaller ones. Even now, except for the NCAA, I think a lot of people get caught up with the whole frenetic, um, you know. But anyway, this idea is
Final
like,
four.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
something
right,
else.
right. So the idea is like, how much focus do we have on local sports and grassroots people, athletes versus the big leagues.
Well, it's well, I like to go out and watch near where I am the little league baseball. Baseball was the one sport I was good at, the one sport that I was able to, even today, if you're a better baseball player than I was, you probably made it to professional baseball. I never did, but I found my time in Calgary, I found out the team that I was a catcher on, the other catcher with me, he really did play for the Cincinnati Reds. He really did make it to the show. And we there is a purity in amateur sport, and I'm going to exclude hockey from this because we're in Canada. For all the other sports but hockey, there's a purity there that you know that the kids are going out there because they want to. be there and have fun. Ultimately, hockey, not so much. Hockey, they know that there's a hockey mom behind, or I hate to say the word hockey mom because hockey dad's just as applicable to hockey mom. You know that there's someone in there pushing them. And I don't go to amateur hockey anymore because I just can't stand the concept of um, a coach getting beat up or a referee. Oh, man. Just before we got on here, there was a post from my buddy Kevin I knew from university. He's a hockey coach and coaches his kids and whatnot. He's been threatened at stick point. Like, why? This is just a dude who wants to come out and watch, bring something along, and he really stresses the element of structure, that for a lot of these kids this is their only time that they have structure in their lives. And he's a pretty structured guy. He's an IT guy, so he's pretty structured. And
Yeah.
but I don't see that. I never see that in baseball. I've never seen that in a uh, like a, say, a high school basketball game. I've never seen a hockey mong in a basketball game. Well, maybe not now with the Raptors and all, and we the North and all that good stuff. But
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's sports, man, and I can't believe you were a writer for that. That's cool, man. And then maybe
oh,
I'll lead that into what happened to Soup Locker, man?
Soup Locker got hacked by a pro, blew it up,
Oh man.
and so I haven't had a chance to go back and I just I was going to actually use it as a tool. The first time I was actually going to use it as a tool for someone to say, okay, you want to see my photography? Go to Soup Locker. And the first time I did it was not 12 hours before a pro had gone in and blown up my site. So my site actually got blown up by an SQL injection. And the guy that owned the server just about shit his pants when he found out about it. I mean, he went livid. Oh, rightly so, because it was my fault, that mea culpa, I didn't do the update. My bad. I should have known better. But
Oh man.
it just left such a, I don't want to go through this shit again.
Sorry, man. I
It's that's why Soup Locker's not there, is because I don't have the drive to go through all that.
Right. Dude, sorry, man, because I really wanted to check you out and I really wanted to see some of the work. And I know that there were some pictures and some photography that you did. I know now Soup Locker was the way for you to promote or even put up some of your work.
Yep.
Yeah. Um,
So I kept the domain alive. So at some point I'm gonna suck it up and
got it. Got it.
maybe find a young whippersnapper that doesn't have to fight with the web. Oh, there's another thing I got to talk about. I call them natives, and what I describe as a native is a person who can't remember before a computer. So that when you're 6 years old in your first day of school, you already know how to make a computer go and do shit, and you can break passwords because you're a kid, right? You know all the stuff that we did as kids,
Right.
they now have do on computers. So the stuff that I had to do as an adult and fight and work and be hard at, they look at me like, you really gotta work at that? What are you, dumb? And at the when I was getting out of IT, I started running into that folks that just, it changes so fast, and that is the element of the, what if I had a thing to despair about the world, is that the rate of change that you and I are living in is accelerating so fast. Like, how the technology we're using right now has been on the earth how long? 6 years. I'll give you 10. Just to keep it simple, we'll give it 10 years. Whereas if we went back 100 years ago, the difference between now and 10 years previous would have been measured in, well, there's less people here. That would have been the only difference. Whereas now, the difference between 10 years ago and now, and from now and 10 years from now, okay, I can't talk about this without not mentioning qubits. You know what qubits are?
No.
Qubits are going to change the world. Qubits are going to render passwords obsolete.
Huh. No, I don't know
Okay.
what that is. I'm gonna look it up.
So when we're done here, or if you got another computer, throw on quantum bit into your Google.
Hold on a second, man. This is the first time I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna throw it up here. Uh,
Quantum bit.
quantum bit. Quantum bit.
Quantum bit. BIT.
Okay. I'm gonna
So
put it up here. Yeah, I'm looking at it right now.
so as you know, the fundamental unit of binary um, calculation is the bit, right?
Right.
On or off, that's your data piece. You can store an on or an off. That much space requires a bit.
Yes.
So if you come up with a quantum bit, so right now I think your Wikipedia page will say that whoever's the leading guy at MIT can probably put together a four bit quantum bit memory that he can demonstrate this is actually viable working as a memory. When engineers have a 64 bit, not 64 kilobit, 64 bit, so that's 4, 8, 16, 32, 64. So how many flops is that? 5. When we have a functional 64-bit memory, we will be able to store all of the literature ever created by human beings in the past or in the future. Every single piece of literature we've ever created or ever will create can be stored on something not much bigger than a 16th of your fingernail.
Wow. Oh shit.
Which means that when you've got a computer that's running quantum bit memory, to be able to calculate the prime of two 400-digit numbers multiplied together, which is what basically encryption is, 256K encryption will be solvable in less than a picosecond. So you'll be able to get, I predict that within 10 years, you'll be able to buy a piece of software that will crack any password ever made, ever, period. Don't bet into it because it's right. Come up with a different way to protect your data because software ain't going or passwords ain't going to work no more.
That's fascinating, man.
That's a level of change that we can't possibly comprehend what's coming down the pipe. We just can't. It's changing too fast. Because I'm one of these guys. I am he who speaks of floppies. I remember when you couldn't load all of DOS at any given time because you needed two floppies. So you had to figure out which set of commands were on disk 1 and which set of commands were on disk 2. And if you needed to run that second command, you had to pull the damn disk out and put the other one in.
Yeah.
And if God forgive you if you forgot because it would crash. I've lost stories because of that. I've literally lost stories on deadline because of that fact.
Huh.
Believe me, when you're a reporter who loses a story on deadline, you remember all the details about it.
Yeah.
Kind of sticks in your head when the editor's yelling at you, right?
You're gonna send me down a rabbit hole, Cam, looking through all that
I
stuff.
think so. Oh, I think yeah. I like to do that to people who understand, who have enough of a handle on technology to understand what that just implies, right?
Yeah. Oh man, that's thanks, man. I don't know if I should thank you though, actually, because now I'm gonna have to spend my Easter break learning about,
Quantum
the
bits.
qubit, the quantum bit. Yeah.
Yeah, the qubit, and it's going to render cryptocurrency kind of useless, but
Yeah, that's crazy.
yeah, it's going to kill cryptocurrency.
Let's go towards more of your pastimes here. Things including the Blue Diamonds Band.
The Blue Diamonds Band.
You're a
Now,
musician, my
Blue
man.
Diamond. I am. Blue Diamonds Band is. If you've ever heard of a second childhood, I am living a second childhood. I am a 55-year-old teenager.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So the Blue Diamonds Band. Everybody that was in the Blue Diamonds Band, but me, played rock and roll when it was new. They everybody there was the youngest guy other than me was 66, and there was the guitar player was 78, and singer was 76. They so think of a 1950s early 60s hit, and they played them, they learned those when they were kids to. And so Nelson's been playing rock around the clock since it came out. And so my first band wasn't with a bunch of kids in the garage trying to figure out with themselves. I was doing with a guy who knew this stuff stone cold. Who the last time he made a mistake on any of this stuff was decades ago. So I had my first band was a chance that all the other musicians when there were absolute consummate musicians who just happened to needed a bass player, and that anybody good enough to play with them would have been super bored playing this shit. So they let me do it and let me learn it. It was so cool.
Oh.
I highly recommend it to anybody if you're hearing this and you're a budding musician. Go find a bunch of old guys or girls or whoever it is. Just play with them. Just play with them, because they do have the feel.
Wow.
In a different band now, but that's the nature of bands, right?
And you're a bassist.
They, I am a bassist. Yeah. Oh,
You
it's
do you
a cool
perform?
story.
Do you perform regularly?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool. Nice.
I play out. That's enough to say. I play out.
Very good. And it's surprising because you don't have a lot of your content out. I think you play live. You're more of a live player than, yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Improv. That's total my thing. Let's figure it out as we go,
Uh,
and make sure you have enough. The musical equivalent of MacGyver.
right. Cool. Cool. All right. So birds.
Birds. Oh yeah, bird nerd. Yeah, bird watching this. Birds watching this. I don't know why I like bird watching, but I do.
I don't know, man.
It's
I love it too. No, like I've kind of my friend and I hang out here, and he tells me he bought a book. Someone gifted him a bird watching book, and now that we're driving in the car, in the prairies especially, you're driving these long stretches of roads where there's nothing really to see, and then you see this bird in the corner of your eye, and then all of a sudden, like now, we're looking out the window and we're trying to figure out what it is. Oh, it's got some red in it. It's got like, it is nice. I do like it. I do like it.
and you'll be able to see western meadowlarks, because make sure you get a western meadowlark into your make sure you can confirm you see one, because they're disappearing.
Okay.
It won't be long before they're gone too. But you live in the central, because the habitat that's got fence posts
Yeah.
is their habitat. They like to sit on fence posts. It's just the right height for them. They sit there and sing and
Oh.
command their territory. But there's so few of them, so figure out what a western meadowlark is and go out and look for them. You
Yeah,
can
I
hear
can.
them.
I
You'll hear them a
remember. I
long
think
way
there
off.
were like students from Manitoba all the way out here studying. Maybe it's at the Meadowlark. I'd have to go and check it out. So yeah, that's something that I'd love to get my hands on. I just don't. I don't know where you find the time, man. Like, dude, I don't know. That's probably one of my things. Is like now I have a few other ones like golf. You've got some golf. You had the photography, and you're definitely informed in a way. You do reading. I'm sure you read. There's all these things, and I find that like personally as a teacher, I don't have time for that. I really don't. And if I
Well,
do, then I'd be negligent to my classroom.
hmm. What do you if you don't mind me asking, what subject do you teach?
I'm a junior high teacher, language arts and social studies.
Oh, social studies.
And
Yes.
so I find
So
myself, like Cam, I find myself like at the cusp because I'm like, okay, I can keep myself informed, and then everything that I'm learning, I can kind of just bring it into the classroom and explain it and go into detail about it. And that's sort of like, okay, that's what I'm doing. I'm doing a service for keeping informed in that way. But all the marking and all the other stuff, like I don't want to get into much detail about what I do, but I just find that there's a lot of things that we could do once you discover the beauty of and the amazingness of learning and trying new things. but there's just not enough time, man. I don't know if you can give me some
sagacious
idea or advice before we end this.
Well, be like Mr. Kidd.
Okay.
Mr. Kidd was my grade 7 social studies teacher, and he must have done something right because I can remember his name and I can remember his face. So you got power there, dude. Be a Mr. Kidd.
All right, man.
And for me, social studies, when I realized the power of social studies is when I read Tale of Two Cities.
Yeah, Charles Dickens. Yeah.
So when the Tale of Two Cities that's when I kind of came together with the idea that you could study a book as the literature, and it's all that in a bag of chips, but it also tells about the French Revolution and what sort of, for a kid growing up in the north side of Calgary, that's a long way away, but the imagination, I was able to, we were able to get there in your mind, and so those kinds of things, and oddly enough, do you guys still do those goofy units on the Kalahari Bushman? I discovered the Kalahari Bushman in grade 7.
No, man. No, we don't.
It was part of the quote curriculum back in the day. You had to do the Kalahari Bushman unit. Everybody I know from my age group that went to school in Alberta, and if I bring that up, it's always the same story. Yeah.
I'm gonna say one more thing about what I was thinking about. This idea of curriculum, and for some teachers who are listening to this, teachers are quasi-professionals. We're not, especially in the junior high level, we're not specialists of any kind. We're generalists. So in that sense, we're really not qualified specialists. Like if you were to tell me that I'm going to, teach scientists and physicists and professional journalists in my classroom, I can't even assert that. So what happens is these people think that teachers are professionals in a way, and that they get a lot of their information from the schooling that they get. I'm going to attest to that. I think I'm more informed by the people, the friends that have made impacts in my life and inform me in that way and bring that into the classroom far more than the 1 year of teachers college that I got that sort of ended up giving me my degree, so-called degree camp.
I couldn't agree more, man. I couldn't agree more.
So that's why I like this show, is because I'm bringing in very interesting people who I can learn from, and people who can share stories that I can take in, and I'm pretty much like learning, and it's the greatest thing that I've been doing. I love it, and having spoken to you, there's so many things I want to look up now after and I can rewatch this episode. I can do it. And that's what I do. I do rewatch it and then I write about it. But yeah, man, I really appreciate you coming on the show, man.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's truly gratifying.
It's a lot of fun.
Nobody wants to listen to what I have to say, man.
You'd be surprised, man. Oh man, you'd be surprised, especially with the current public. Most people don't have the capacity to watch anything for more than 2 minutes, right? So I guess it's more
true.
So long-term discussions and long-form discussions is very important, I think. But now I guess if I can kind of like manipulate it into the niche market of like 1 minute, 2 minute clips, which I've been doing, kind of works out that way. So yeah. I want to thank you, man, for coming on, and we went over, but like I don't want to interrupt anybody, especially when good things are happening. So I do want you to come back again, man. I don't know if you ever be interested in coming back on.
Sure. Yeah.
Cool,
Anytime, man.
Appreciate it, man. All right. Well, I'm gonna thank you here, and we'll probably end the show now. So.
Okay.
Thanks, Cam.
Hasta luego.
Cheers, man.
Do you press the button or I just sit here?
I'll just press it. See ya.
Okay.
Holy cow, that was a jam-packed episode. Thank you very much for those of you who are hanging out. I didn't think there was a lot of people watching this. Again, I think the live component is less of a allure than it is when I record it and analyze and revisit some of the things that were said. Thank you, Cam, for joining me, and I appreciate the wonderful show. Have a good night, everyone. Cheers.